Hey there, viewers. Ever felt something was so wrong you couldn't even force down a meal? That's where Diddy is now. He stopped eating in prison, and when the guards asked why, what he told them sent a chill through the room. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Fork That Stayed Clean. I ain't no writer or anything, so don't expect me to tell this like one of those shows on TV. I just work in the kitchen down at MDC Brooklyn, and I've been doing this long enough to know what's normal in this place and what sure as hell ain't. My name's Latrice, and for the past 6 years, I've been wearing this hairnet and pushing this trays like it's the only thing keeping this prison stitched together. Some days it feels like it is. You learn a lot in a place like this, but not the kind of stuff that books teach you. You learn what roaches sound like when they scurry behind the fridge. You learn which inmates are gonna scream about getting peas instead of corn. And you learn real quick how to keep your mouth shut when things start to feel wrong. I remember the first day I saw his name printed on the meal card. Coms schön. Everybody was buzzing. Well, as much as we're allowed to buzz in here. He had just come in and already folks were whispering through the walls. The celebrity, they called him. The mogul. One of the COs joked that he expected us to serve him lobster and champagne. I rolled my eyes and slapped his tray down like I do for anyone else. Chicken patty, overcooked green beans, 2 slices of bread hard enough to knock a man out. Welcome to the big leagues. The tray came back full. At first, I didn't think much of it. Rich folks are picky, right? Probably used to 5-star chefs and gold-trimmed napkins. First day, second day, same thing. Tray came back untouched, except maybe a poke in the mashed potatoes like he was testing it for poison or something. I've seen it before. New inmates get nervous. Some don't eat for a day or two until the shock wears off. But then it stretched into a week. 7 days of untouched trays, and I'm talking not a single damn bite. No broken bread, no missing beans. Even the little half pint of milk came back with the seal still on. And here's the thing, the fork, clean as a whistle, not even a lick. It was like he just sat there staring at the food every single day. I started watching the guards more closely. Most of the time, COs don't care what happens to these trays, but I caught one, Officer Randall, holding Diddy's tray a little longer before dumping it. He turned it over in his hands like he was looking for something. Then I heard him mumble to another officer, "Quiet, but I got good ears." He said he won't eat 'cause they told him what's coming. That's when I felt it. That thing in your chest when you know something ain't right. Like the room's a little colder than it should be, even though the vent's been busted for years. I tried to shake it off, but it stayed with me through the rest of my shift. Even the sound of trays clanging and inmates shouting didn't drown it out. Now let me tell you about this kitchen. You probably think of kitchens like in restaurants or hospitals, but prison kitchens, they're a whole different beast. Grease never really leaves the floor. It just relocates. The big walk-in freezer's got a busted seal, so half the meat we serve is half frozen still when it hits the tray. Roaches? Don't get me started. They've built a whole civilization behind the warming racks. And the smell, Lord, it's like someone mixed bleach with sweat and hopelessness. Me and the girls, Shonda, Miss L, and Maria, we tried not to talk too much about comms. Ain't none of us looking to be written up for gossiping, but still, word gets around. Someone said he was walking like an old man now, shuffling instead of strutting. Another said his hair was going gray so fast it looked like ash. And one CO swore Diddy was talking to the walls at night. You ever feel watched? Not just looked at, but watched. Like something sitting just outside the corners of your vision, breathing down your neck. That's how the whole kitchen felt that week, like the walls were listening. Like maybe whatever was going on in Calm's cell had started bleeding into the rest of us. It's weird what hunger does to a person. Some get angry, some get scared. But Combs, he got still. That was the word for it. Still like a statue. Still like the air before a thunderstorm. I passed him once while pushing the cart down his tier. He looked up at me, slow, like it hurt to move. Eyes sunken, skin patchy and a little gray. Not even the kind of gray from getting old. More like something inside him was dying. He didn't say nothing, just watched me, like he wanted to speak but was afraid of what might come out. I started checking his trays before they went out. Not 'cause I had to, just because I had to know. And every time, I got the same thing back. Full food, clean fork, until last Thursday. That morning, we had meatloaf on the menu. Prison meatloaf ain't really meat. It's more like sponge soaked in ketchup. I hated making it, but I piled his tray like I always did and handed it off. But when it came back, something was different. I noticed the edge of the tray looked scratched. Not just scratched, carved. I pretended to be cleaning up while everyone else talked in the back. I brought the tray closer to the prep station and tilted it under the light. There, on the inside edge, were 3 words, small, but deep enough to stay. We already ate. I stared at it for a long time, longer than I should have. My hands went cold, even though the kitchen was sweltering. I didn't know what it meant. I still don't. But something in those words sat heavy in my chest, like a weight I couldn't name. I ran my fingers over the letters. They were fresh, jagged, like they'd been carved slow, maybe with the edge of the fork. My eyes went to the fork itself. It was there on the tray, same as always, shiny and untouched. But now it looked different, like it had been used not to eat but for something else. I didn't tell anyone. Who would I tell? The COs wouldn't care. The other kitchen girls would laugh, or worse, start whispering about me. So I just dumped the tray and kept it moving. But all that night, I couldn't stop thinking about those words. We already ate. Ate what? Ate who? Now listen, I've seen weird things in this place. People go crazy, people break. I've seen grown men cry like babies and tough gangsters crumble after 1 week in seg. But this ain't that. This feels like something else. Something older. I ain't saying I believe in demons or spirits or none of that mess, but whatever Diddy's going through, it ain't just hunger. It's like he's scared of what'll happen if he eats. Like the food ain't for him no more. Like something's waiting, watching, feeding through him. I called out sick the next day. Couldn't bring myself to go back in there. When I did, everything was the same. Same smells, same noise, same untouched tray. But I swear to you, that fork was still clean. And now, every time I close my eyes, I see those words. We already ate. I don't know what they mean. But I think he does. Chapter 2. He doesn't sleep either. Graves didn't much like working the night shift, but in this place preference wasn't part of the job. He was a lifer, not in the way the inmates were, but in the way that made his bones settle into the fluorescent hum of prison walls like they belonged there. 10 years at MDC Brooklyn had dulled his nerves to almost everything. He'd seen stabbings during laundry swaps, caught guards snorting pills off the evidence table, even walked into a cell once and found a man hanging by his own bedsheet, gently spinning in silence while the TV played an old music video. But in all his time walking the tiers at night, he had never seen anything quite like Combs. At first it was just the eating thing, which the kitchen folks had already whispered about, loud enough that it bounced off the corridor walls. Graves figured it was ego. Celebs came in thinking they were different. But the not eating turned into something else, something quieter, meaner. Then the rumors started curling in from the inmates, and when Graves started pulling solo overnight duty on Diddy's tier, he started seeing things for himself. He doesn't sleep, not even close. Graves would pass by his cell at 1 in the morning, and there Diddy would be, pacing slow like he was measuring out the length of the room with his steps. 7 paces up, 7 paces back, again and again. The sound of slippered feet against concrete echoed longer than it should have. Sometimes he'd stop and just stare at the wall for what had to be half an hour straight. No movement, just breathing that got rougher the longer he stood there, like whatever he was looking at wasn't just a wall. Other nights he hummed, not a normal tune either. It was backwards. Graves could tell because the cadence was off, like the song was trying to unravel itself back into silence. Once, he recognized the shape of a melody. It was one of Diddy's own tracks, but something was wrong with the notes, the way it slowed and bent and stretched words that shouldn't be stretchable. Graves couldn't shake the sound of it after. It made him feel like something was chewing behind his eyes. He tried not to linger outside the cell. There were protocols. You did your rounds, logged what needed logging, and kept moving unless you had cause to stop. But after 4 nights of this, of watching a man with a swollen face and eyes like shattered marble scratch symbols into the wall with his fingernail, Graves started writing unofficial notes. Just a notebook, kept it in his locker. He wrote down phrases he heard, odd things muttered when Combs thought no one was near. They feed through the silence. It was never about the money, it was the offerings. Don't swallow, they promised, then they fed. Graves knew he shouldn't have been writing any of it down. It wasn't protocol. But some part of him felt like if he didn't, the words would stay stuck in his own head. He decided to talk to the other inmates quietly, off record. Most didn't want to say much, especially when Diddy was in earshot, but a few of the lifers didn't care anymore. One, an old Dominican dude named Lito with eyes like dried out paper, said Diddy believed he was marked, not by the system, but by something else, something that followed him into the prison. Marked by what? Graves asked. Lito just smiled with no teeth and said, "You don't get rich like that without making a trade, officer, but trade's gotta balance out." Another inmate, this one a quiet younger guy from downstate named Harmon, told Graves he heard crying in the showers a few nights back. Not sobbing like someone having a breakdown, crying like a baby. Except there were no infants in MDC. It was him, Harmon said. I swear, man. He was sitting in the corner of the shower stall, knees to his chest, rocking back and forth, whispering, "They're not supposed to have babies." Said it over and over. Graves wanted to laugh at first, wanted to dismiss it as cell block mythology, the kind of nonsense that spread when people had nothing but time and fluorescent lights and peeling walls. But then he saw it himself. It was 2 a.m. on a Thursday when Graves turned the corner past Combs' cell and saw him on his knees, arms spread out like some twisted prayer. His head was tilted up, eyes shut, lips moving fast like he was arguing with someone who wasn't there. The wall in front of him, fresh scratches, new ones, symbols Graves had never seen before. Circles inside triangles, jagged X's. One looked like an eye but drawn wrong, like whoever drew it didn't want it to see. Graves called out to him. "Hey, you good?" Combs didn't respond. Just stopped mid-chant, looked over his shoulder real slow and whispered, "Don't swallow what they feed you. The deal's off." That was it, just that. Then he got up and sat on his bed like nothing happened. Graves wrote it down in his little book and didn't sleep when he got home that morning. By now, the decay wasn't just in Combs' behavior. It was in his body. His hair, once jet black and slicked down like he was still posing for cameras, had turned a strange silver gray at the roots. Not even natural graying. This was color being sucked out, like something had drained the warmth from inside. His skin was blotchy, too pale in places, too red in others. Graves thought it looked like a rash, but none of the nurses would give a straight answer. One of the other COs said he smelled something weird when standing near his cell. Said it wasn't just the usual prison funk. This was sweet, like rotting fruit left in a sealed room. Graves tried not to get close enough to confirm, but the few times he had to escort Diddy to medical, he swore the air felt thicker around him, like humidity without heat, like being in the jungle with nothing but bad thoughts. They'd moved Diddy to partial isolation by this point. Not full seg, but close enough. Fewer contact points. 1 hour rec. Meals through the slot, even though they always came back untouched. Graves started wondering why they didn't put a psych eval on him. Then again, maybe they had and just kept it sealed. The higher-ups were tight-lipped lately. Too tight. On Graves' 7th night on rotation, he got bold. During the midnight walk, he brought a flashlight and lingered outside Combs' cell after the cameras rotated away. The man was asleep, or so it seemed, but his eyes were open. Not wide open, just cracked. Graves crouched near the bed slot, aimed his light low, and shone it under the mattress. He didn't know what he expected. Contraband, maybe? A weapon? Instead, what he saw was a single line etched into the steel bed frame beneath. "You don't get to die clean." He blinked and looked again. Same words. Same scratch marks. No mistaking it. He didn't say a word to anyone after that. Not on his report, not to the other guards, not even to the warden. Just logged his hours and walked out into the gray morning like always, the prison gates groaning open behind him. But as he sat in his car, staring at the rising sun that looked too dull for daylight, he couldn't stop repeating those words in his head. "You don't get to die clean." And deep down, Graves believed it. Chapter 3. The riot wasn't random. They said it was a race riot. That's what the news called it anyway. Like it was some old-school gang beef that flared up over commissary or a bad look across the yard. But I was there, 2 blocks over, and I'm telling you right now, it had nothing to do with race. That was just the excuse they threw out so no one would look deeper. Nobody wanted to admit what really kicked it off, because if they did, they'd have to talk about Combs. And nobody in here wants to talk about Combs, not out loud, not for real. It was mid-February, cold enough that even the rats were hiding. We hadn't seen sunlight in days. You learn to live with the cold in here. You learn to ignore the mildew smell in the air, the sound of pipes that never shut up, the guards that pace like vultures. But you don't learn how to ignore a silence that don't make sense. The kind that creeps in before something breaks. That day started weird. Breakfast was late, which always sets people off. Then the rumor started floating. Someone in Block D said a folder had been slipped under a cell door. Not a regular folder, a sealed one. Official-looking, white tag on it, no markings except a thick black line across the flap. The kind of thing you only see during court transfers or when someone high up wants something kept quiet. I didn't see the folder myself, not at first, but I saw what happened after. First it went to a guy named Garrison. Big dude, used to run with Latin Kings. Quiet lately. He kept to himself after getting jumped last fall. Word is he opened the folder, looked at the first page, and puked on the floor. Didn't say a word, just sat down on his bunk and rocked. Next morning he was gone, transferred out, or maybe sedated. We don't get answers. But the folder didn't stay in his cell. It moved. Like it had legs. By lunch, people were on edge. Nobody was talking above a whisper. Guards noticed, but didn't do much. That's how things are at MDC. You let the pot boil until the lid flies off, then pretend you never saw the steam. But then the screaming started. One cell erupted. 2 guys fighting, screaming something about being fed lies and hearing the names in their sleep. Blood hit the floor. Then it spread. Another tier went up. Then another. Fists, makeshift shivs, bodies hitting metal. One guy threw a plastic chair at the guard station window. Didn't break it, but the sound made my stomach twist. I remember standing on my bunk, trying to see through the crack in the reinforced window. The hallway lights were flickering like they do during power tests, except there wasn't any scheduled maintenance. The air felt tight. People were screaming, but not all from pain. Some of them were screaming like they saw something they couldn't understand. Diddy's name came up during the chaos. I heard it clear, 3 times, maybe more. One dude shouted, "He's feeding them secrets." Another yelled, "That folder's his. It's his." Nobody was trying to hurt him, though. Nobody even got near his block. It was like his name triggered the thing. not as a target, but as a switch. When the lockdown finally hit, the place got buried in darkness. No lights, just emergency strobes and static from busted radios. For hours we were locked in with nothing but the memory of that screaming and the sound of wet breathing through the vents. After it calmed down, they moved a bunch of us around. Said it was for safety, but I think they were just trying to scatter the ones who saw too much. I got moved to another block. Cleaner, quieter, felt like a reward, but I knew better. The night I arrived in my new cell, I found something under the mattress. A folder. Not sealed this time, but same white color, same black stripe across the flap. I didn't want to touch it, but I did. Inside were 3 pieces of paper. First was a list of names. Most were blacked out. One wasn't. A name I hadn't heard in years. A DJ from Miami who vanished after a party at Combs' old estate. People said he fled to Spain. Others said he OD'd. But here was his name, underlined with the words he spoke, scribbled next to it in blue ink. The second page was harder to understand. It looked like a flight log, private jets, cities, timestamps. Nothing illegal on the surface, but all the flights were one way, and every destination had a number scrawled beside it, 7s and 9s, all prime numbers. The third page, I can't explain. It wasn't words, it was symbols. Drawn in black pen, shaky lines like from someone whose hand wouldn't stop twitching. Circles inside triangles, eyes with no pupils, a mouth with no lips, and below it, the phrase I'd heard whispered from cell to cell for weeks. We already ate. I dropped the folder and sat on the edge of the bunk, staring at my hands like they'd just betrayed me. A few nights later, I saw Combs walking the tier during his hour out. He passed by my cell. I looked him dead in the face. He didn't blink, not once. His eyes weren't angry. They weren't scared. They were empty, like whatever had been in there was long gone, and something else had moved in, just wearing the shell. He looked at me like he knew I'd seen the folder. And I knew then, the riot wasn't about race. It wasn't about gangs. It was about someone seeing what they shouldn't have. And now, I wish I hadn't. Chapter 4. Before the Doctor's Silence. Chapter 4. The Doctor's Silence. The call came in at 4:23 a.m., which was the worst time it could have come. Everything feels heavier in the early morning hours, especially in the medical wing of MDC Brooklyn. Lights buzzed dimly against the cracked linoleum, and the radiators clicked like old bones settling. The hallway leading into medical smelled like bleach and rust and something else no one could name. They always said it was just the pipes, but Nurse Marisol knew better. She'd been here long enough to know that every part of this place had its own sickness. When they wheeled him in, he looked like he was already halfway gone. John Combs, Diddy. His name still sounded ridiculous in this setting. It didn't match the image of the man slumped in that chair, head lolling to one side, lips pale and dry as paper. His skin had taken on a strange waxy tone, splotchy in patches, as if whatever color had once filled him had begun retreating inward. The guards didn't say much when they brought him in, just that he'd collapsed during morning rounds and was unresponsive to verbal prompts. That was the kind of language they used in incident reports, to make things sound more technical than they were. Marisol didn't ask questions right away. She just moved, snapping on gloves, checking vitals, looping the oxygen monitor onto his finger. Pulse was slow, skin was clammy. He smelled strange, not unclean but sweet, like decaying fruit. That wasn't normal. She'd worked in nursing 21 years, 6 of them inside prisons, and she knew the smell of liver failure, kidney infection, untreated diabetes. This wasn't that. She tapped lightly on his cheek, trying to bring him around. "Mr. Combs, can you hear me?" His eyes twitched just slightly and then fluttered open. Not all the way, just enough to fix on her. She expected fear, confusion, maybe even embarrassment. What she got was something colder. He looked through her, not at her. When he finally spoke, it was with a dry tongue and voice that rasped like it hadn't been used in days. "They're inside already." Marisol paused mid-motion. "What did you say?" But he didn't answer. His eyelids drifted closed again. His breathing stayed shallow but rhythmic. She tried to run a tox screen later that morning, suspecting drugs. Maybe something passed through a guard, maybe something he'd stashed. But the labs came back clean. No opiates, no sedatives, no uppers, nothing. He wasn't on psych meds either. According to the chart, his December MRI had shown mild joint inflammation, some minor nerve compression, but nothing that would explain a man falling apart like this. By noon, the rumors had already started to stir. Not from the inmates this time, from the staff. Someone claimed they saw the warden pacing outside the infirmary earlier. Someone else said they'd overheard the doctor requesting a sealed medical transport 2 weeks ago, but the request got denied. Marisol tried to tune it out. Her job wasn't to get lost in speculation, but she couldn't deny that something was off, not just with Combs, but with the entire medical wing since he'd arrived. He refused fluids, even when they hooked up the IV, kept pulling his arm away, as if the catheter was trying to put something into him instead of the other way around. On the second day, he bit through the plastic line. Didn't speak a word, just stared at it, like he'd done something sacred. Marisol called the attending. The doctor was a tall, quiet man who rarely came down from his office unless absolutely necessary. But this time, he didn't come at all. He sent a message instead. Monitor vitals, continue fluids, no additional interventions unless he coded. Marisol was stunned. She asked if the doctor would like her to move him into the observation cell. His response, no, he stays where he is. She'd never seen a doctor decline a direct examination like that before. By the third day, Combs stopped opening his eyes altogether. His body had grown even thinner. His collarbone stuck out like a cracked shelf beneath his neck. Bruising began to appear beneath his eyes, deep purple rings that made it look like he hadn't slept in weeks. His fingers twitched constantly, even when he was unconscious. He spoke sometimes, but never to anyone in the room. Whispers, words like, "They're tasting me," or "No more offerings," or "The drain knows the name." Marisol scribbled some of it down, but stopped after a while. The words clung to her after hours, echoed in her ears when she tried to fall asleep at night. Other nurses began refusing to work his rotation. Even Eduardo, the big guy who never flinched at blood or vomit, started requesting to be moved back to General Med. "I don't like the air in his room," he said one morning, face pale. "Feels like it's watching me." That was when the talk about the specialist started. Marisol didn't know the full story, but apparently someone, maybe even the warden himself, had quietly called in a civilian doctor. An off-the-book psych evaluator who showed up without a name tag and left before lunch. The only thing Marisol heard was that the man walked out with his coat half-buttoned, his face gray, mumbling to himself about misplaced souls. The visit never showed up in any logs. One evening after her shift, Marisol stayed late. Something was bothering her. She couldn't shake the image of Combs' face, how hollow it had gotten, like a mask that used to fit better. She went back to his file, flipped through the usual sheets, intake, vitals, labs. Then came the MRI from December, the one that led to the late-night hospital transport. She'd seen it once already, but this time she looked closer. There was a second scan, one that had been misfiled, a low-res black-and-white copy time-stamped 2 hours after the first one. It showed the same frame, cervical, spine, and skull, but this one had a faint shadow near the base of the brainstem. No radiologist's notes, no diagnosis. Just the scan and a strange alphanumeric code handwritten across the bottom. CXR Delta 9 MDE T. She blinked at it. That wasn't a standard MDC code. In fact, it didn't match any medical formatting she knew. She asked a tech about it the next day. He looked confused, said the second scan wasn't on file. And then, just before her next shift ended, she noticed something strange on the IV stand in Combs' room. It was subtle, barely there. At first she thought it was a manufacturer's logo, but when she leaned closer, she saw that someone had drawn on the inside of the bag with a fine tip marker. It was a symbol, not one she recognized. A circle within a circle. Inside the smallest one, a triangle pointing down, and inside that, a single eye. It wasn't sloppy, it was precise, too precise to have been doodled out of boredom, and it wasn't visible from the front of the bag. You had to tilt it just right in the overhead light to catch the ink at all. She felt a chill crawl up her spine and didn't know why, just instinct. She thought about the shadow on the MRI, the words he whispered in his sleep, the way the other staff wouldn't speak his name anymore, like he was something contagious. She didn't mention the symbol to anyone. She just watched as the drip continued, slow and steady, and listened to the quiet rustle of Combs' breathing in the bed behind her. "They're inside already," he had said. And now, Marisol wondered if he was right. Chapter 5. The Call That Changed Everything. They kept her off the books. That's how these things worked when the client was someone like Sean Combs, too high profile for trust, too radioactive for error. No real titles, no paper trail, just a burner phone, a one-room office near downtown, and a login to a secure server that didn't appear on any of the defense team's shared drives. Her name was Rena, 28, sharp as hell, and the kind of investigator who'd made her way up not through law school or networking mixers, but from years of cleaning up other people's digital messes. She could scrape metadata out of a deleted voice memo, unearth email threads from encrypted backups, and track a whisper through a room full of static. And when Diddy's team needed someone to quietly monitor and catalog his prison phone logs, they called her. Normally, the monitored calls were nothing special. Some muffled conversations with his lawyer, always clipped, legal, professional. A few with a woman whose name never came up but whose voice was always calm, measured. Inmate calls were recorded by default at MDC Brooklyn, unless a lawyer arranged for a protected line. Nothing in these recordings ever hinted at the storm brewing outside the prison gates. No references to lawsuits. No mention of the things the tabloids were obsessing over. Baby oil, trafficking allegations, Wild King Night rumors. If there was code in his words, it was buried deep. But then came the flagged call. It hit her desk on a Sunday afternoon, auto-lagged by the prison's software due to a pattern anomaly. That could mean anything. Silence too long, static spikes, frequency disruption. She almost deleted it without opening it. But something in the metadata caught her eye. The call lasted 13 minutes. It had been placed at 3:09 a.m. That was the first red flag. Inmates didn't get calls at 3 in the morning, not unless something had gone wrong with the system, or unless someone on the inside had made it happen. She slipped in her headphones and hit play. The call started with silence. A full 12 seconds, then a low hum, like a feedback loop just beneath the threshold of human hearing. She watched the waveform twitch on her screen. Audio was there, but distorted. Then, the voice. It was Diddy. Unmistakably. Hoarse, distant, as if speaking into a phone across the room. And something was off in the way he spoke. Not just the sound of him, but the cadence. The words came slow, like dragging a key across stone. He didn't greet anyone. He just whispered, "Tell him the babies are hungry." Rena froze. That was it. The sentence echoed in her headphones like it had been dropped into a cave. There was a crackle after that, static with a pattern to it, not random. Something like a reversed tape played too slow, thick with layered sounds. A baby crying maybe, but reversed and warped until it sounded like a shriek underwater. She leaned closer to the waveform, isolating segments, trying to clear it up. The software couldn't even recognize most of it as language. It read it as noise. But then came a second voice. Male, softer, nearly impossible to hear over the distortion. One word. Confirmed. Then the call cut out. She sat back, chills crawling down her neck. Tell him the babies are hungry. Who was him? Who were the babies? Rena scrubbed the audio 5 more times, checked every second, downloaded the backup and ran it through her own filter suite. Same results, only that phrase stood out. The rest was a mess of hiss, electric crackle, and strange echoes that made her stomach twist the longer she listened. She logged into the internal system and started tracking. The number Diddy had called was blocked. That wasn't unusual. Prison calls often routed through anonymized lines, but this one had been marked as internal redirect, which meant the call hadn't gone outside the prison at all. It had stayed inside. She checked the internal extension directory. The number belonged to an unused security line, one that had been deactivated 2 years ago after a guard transferred to a federal facility in Illinois, except this one had been reactivated exactly 4 minutes before the call, and deactivated again 4 minutes after. She filed a soft inquiry with IT, disguising it as a permissions check. No one answered. She called the general line. The phone rang 13 times. No voicemail. No one picked up. Rena had done this kind of work for years. She knew how to play it cool, how to keep her nerves locked down. But there was something about this file that pressed into her bones. She couldn't explain it. She just knew that she had to find out who the voice on the other end belonged to. She ran a voice print scan against known associates. She had access to Diddy's professional logs, redacted court materials, and cross-referenced everything with a few backdoor celebrity intelligence databases she wasn't supposed to have access to. The results were even stranger than she expected. Of the 29 voice print matches, 17 came back with deceased status. 4 were whereabouts unknown, and 3 were marked redacted by request of federal agency. She stared at her screen. This wasn't normal. This wasn't even criminal. It was something else. Something bigger. Something that wasn't supposed to exist on paper. She ran the call through one last filter, a frequency isolator that visualized sound patterns as color spectrums. In the center of the file's heath map there was a spike, not in decibels, not in volume, but in structure. It looked like a symbol. A triangle, faint, superimposed over the background waveform. She stared at it for a long time, then checked the timestamp of the spike. 3:13 a.m. Exactly 60 seconds after Diddy had said the word babies. Later that night, Rena sat in the dark of her apartment, the only light coming from her laptop. The file sat there on her desktop. Call _3_9_red. She'd made a backup, scrubbed the copy from the defense system, left no trace. Still, she felt eyes on her. Not paranoia, instinct. The kind of feeling that sinks in when the room goes too quiet and the shadows feel just a little too thick. She shut the laptop and walked to her window. Her reflection stared back, paler than she remembered. She hadn't eaten all day. She hadn't realized that until just now. On her kitchen table where she'd dumped her work bag, the phone began to ring. Locked number. She let it ring once, twice. By the third time, she had already made her decision. She grabbed a flash drive from the drawer, copied the call file onto it, and shoved it into an envelope. Sealed it, no label. She didn't know what she was doing. She just knew the file had to go somewhere else, somewhere that wasn't here. The next morning, she dropped it in an unmarked mail chute downtown. When she got home later that night, her laptop was still on the desk. The call file was gone. Not deleted. Gone. Chapter 6. He's talking to the drain now. They put me on cleanup duty for Tier 8 because I'm old and quiet. That's what this place does. When your back don't give out and your mouth don't run, they let you sweep the parts of the prison no one else wants to be near. No fights up there, no noise, just the sick ones, the famous ones, the ones who don't belong anywhere else. I've been at MDC going on 23 years, mostly low-tier janitorial. You don't get privileges in here unless you keep your head down and act invisible like a shadow that moves mop water around. That's what I do. Every morning I get up, rinse my mouth in the rusty sink, and carry my bucket down the hall like it weighs more than it should. People think being a janitor in prison means you're a joke, but let me tell you, the floors remember things. So do the drains. The first time I saw Kong's Diddy, whatever they call him, I didn't think much. I'd cleaned after worse. Drug lords who spat blood on the tile, celebrities who cried into the toilet every night until their eyes turned pink. But there was something in the way he sat on his bunk, quiet and still, that didn't sit right. He didn't look broken, he looked hollow. Like the man who used to live in his body had stepped out for air and never came back. He wouldn't look at me, not at first, just sat there with his hands on his knees and eyes fixed on the sink like it was whispering secrets. I figured it was psychosis, happens more than people think. Prison scrambles you. The silence, the fluorescent buzz, the stench of too many men shoved into concrete holes. Sometimes your mind breaks just to pass the time. But then I started hearing what he was saying. Not all of it. His voice stayed low, like he was afraid of being overheard even when nobody else was around. But I'm quiet. My ears still work. I'd linger a second longer outside his cell after mopping, pretend to adjust the mop handle, and listen. He was talking to the drain, not muttering nonsense, real words, lyrics. Not the radio stuff, not the big hits. These were deep cuts, verses that never got released, songs that got buried under lawsuits and studio deals, songs I only heard back when I used to run sound cables for clubs in Flatbush. I remembered one of them clear, Hourglass Wine. That track was pulled before it dropped. Rumor was it had samples they didn't have clearance for. But here was Combs, whispering lines from it like a prayer, like he was offering it to the rusted mouth of the sink. I stopped sleeping well after that. At first I tried to ignore it, went back to routine, mop, bleach, dump, sweep, rinse, repeat. But the sounds didn't leave. I started hearing the whispers before I got to his cell, like the pipes were carrying them, like the drains were passing his words around like gossip. His cell started to change too. Not the layout, those stay the same, concrete walls, metal bunk, toilet in the corner. But something about the walls. First it was just scratching, but then I saw symbols drawn faintly in soap, in what looked like blood. Circles within circles, upside-down crosses that bent into spiral shapes. One day, I found what looked like a mouth drawn under his bunk. Just a mouth, no face, no eyes, just teeth. I started bringing in a scrap notebook and sketching what I saw. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Or fear. You see enough darkness in this place and your hands start reaching for anything that might give it shape. I didn't show the guards. They wouldn't care. Some of them already thought he was cursed. I heard one say he wouldn't walk past Combs' cell without holding his breath, like the air around him was tainted. One night I was doing late duty. Power had flickered earlier in the evening, something about a transformer glitch. Everything felt off. I was scrubbing near the end of the tier when I heard him speak, clearer than I ever had. "It wasn't a party," he said. I stopped mid-swipe. It was a feeding. His voice was calm, not scared, like he was remembering something that made perfect sense to him and no sense at all to anyone else. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. I just stood there while he kept whispering into the drain, his face inches from it, like he was confessing into a mouth that might bite him back. He listed names after that. Some of them I recognized, old producers, club promoters, managers. Some I didn't. One name came up twice, Silas. I don't know who that is. But the second time he said it, he started humming again. That same warped melody I'd heard weeks ago from the cell block over. Backwards, slow, wrong. That night I dreamed something I wish I hadn't. A room full of people, all wearing masks, not party masks, ceremonial ones, long, bird-like beaks. They stood around a silver table, hands clasped. Children wept somewhere behind the walls, muffled. On the table were trays. The food on them was moving, squirming. The people didn't speak. They just waited. At the head of the table sat Combs. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was smiling. I woke up gasping, mouth bone dry like I'd been swallowing dust in my sleep. My arms tingled. My fingertips felt wrong, like something had been prying under my fingernails. I tried to forget the dream, but when I walked into the block that morning, he was standing at the front of his cell, waiting, watching. He said nothing, but he smiled. From that day, I started carrying my old Bible with me, not 'cause I'm religious, hadn't opened it in years, but because I needed something to hold on to, something real, something heavy. The drain whispers were getting louder. I know how that sounds, but I swear it. Sometimes, even when he wasn't in the cell, I'd hear water gurgling in a rhythm. 3 slow bubbles, pause, then one sharp hiss. And the worst part? The words. Not full sentences, just fragments, in voices I didn't recognize. Tell them they're still chewing. Blood keeps the door open. Babies don't remember. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? An old janitor who talks about singing drains and haunted lyrics. Last week I finished my shift early, went back to my cell, tried to sleep, but I kept thinking about that drawing under his bunk, the mouth. So I pulled out my Bible, not to read it, just to hold it, something cold and solid. When I opened it, tucked between the pages of Psalms, was a folded piece of toilet paper. At first I thought I'd used it as a bookmark, something from weeks ago, but when I unfolded it, my stomach turned. It was a sketch, one of his. Same hand, same ink, same angles, a circle within a circle, a triangle pointing down. And in the center, a single wide open eye. Beneath it, 3 words. It knows now. Haven't gone back to tier 8 since, but the drains in my own cell have started to hiss. And sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I hear music. Not the kind you dance to, the kind you feed. Chapter 7. He finally spoke to the Warden. Warden Ellison had dealt with every kind of madness that came through the gates of MDC Brooklyn. He'd managed serial killers and celebrity breakouts, crooked cops and crying senators' sons. He'd navigated through the bureaucracy like a rat through sewer grates, memorized the dance of budget reports and internal investigations, played babysitter to FBI agents when they came sniffing around high-profile inmates. He prided himself on a certain detachment, never got too close, never lost sleep. He wasn't in the business of caring. He was in the business of containment. And yet, over the past 2 weeks, something about the Combs case had shifted that equilibrium. It wasn't just the inmate's physical deterioration or the rumors circling like vultures. It was the way the facility itself seemed to bend around him. Schedules broke down, lights flickered more than usual on his tier. Officers began refusing rotations. And then the riots. Chaotic, disproportionate, full of whispers that made no sense when laid out in official reports. When the Bureau started asking questions after the February lockdown, Ellison had defended his facility like a seasoned general. Internal systems were under review, he said. Staffing was short, but security was sound. There was no evidence to suggest Combs had triggered anything. There was no folder, no transmission. Just inmate paranoia and rumors spinning into tension. He stood by his people, but quietly, behind his shut door, he'd begun to feel the same creeping sensation that had infected his staff, the sense that something had taken root on Tier 8. He avoided direct contact with Combs at first. That was protocol with high-profile inmates. They were managed through layers, kept insulated, but the medical reports were troubling. The nurses couldn't explain the weight loss, the tremors, the refusal to eat or sleep. The MRI findings had been classified and handed off to an external agency before Ellison himself had even seen them. When he tried to access the files, the login screen had simply denied him with a blinking red bar. And then came the pattern. 3 inmates stopped eating, then 5, then 11. All from different tiers, no shared history, no common gangs, no recent interactions with Combs. But each had said the same thing when questioned, feeding them through us. The reports landed on Ellison's desk like bricks, every box checked, every line filled with the kind of vague professionalism that only made things feel more disturbing. One report even noted that an inmate in SEG had drawn a symbol on his wall, triangle in a circle, eye in the center, the same shape the medical nurse had described seeing inside Combs' IV bag, though no one else ever found it again. That's when Ellison decided to break protocol. He scheduled a face-to-face. No cameras, no staff, no legal representation, just the warden and the man behind the growing silence. They met in a cold interview room off the lower corridor. Concrete walls, stainless steel table, a single flickering light that buzzed like a dying hornet. Combs was already seated when Ellison arrived, wrists chained, eyes sunken so far back it looked like they'd been scooped out. He didn't stand, didn't blink. Ellison sat down slowly, his boots echoing across the tile. For a long moment neither man spoke. The warden examined him. The weight loss was worse in person. Skin drawn tight over cheekbones, fingertips twitching like piano strings plucked by invisible hands. "You're refusing food," Ellison said calmly, voice flat. Combs smiled, just slightly. "I stopped eating so they'd stop tasting," he replied. Ellison's mouth went dry. He forced himself to keep his tone measured. "They who? The ones underneath?" The warden exhaled. "You've been through psychological evaluation. There's no indication of a break." Combs tilted his head. "You ever been below sub-level 2? Ellison frowned. "There is no sub-level 2. There is if you remember the old floor plans." Ellison said nothing. The original structure of MDC had undergone renovations in the late 90s after a fire exposed infrastructure issues. Some wings had been shut down, others rebranded, but the idea of a sub-level 2 was a myth, a leftover ghost from a time before electronic logs. Combs leaned forward, his chains clinking softly. "It's not on the map anymore. They made sure of that. But you still hear them, in the drains, in the hum of the walls. You think that noise is just electrical feedback? They sing down there. They hum." Ellison stared at him. "You're speaking in riddles." "I'm speaking plainly. You just forgot how to listen." He paused, licking cracked lips. The parties weren't for pleasure. They were ceremonies. Wild King Nights, they called them. That was never a nickname. It was a title. A role. One passed on, one fed. The warden sat back. He didn't believe it, not exactly, but something in Combs' voice, something cold and smooth like oil, made him want to stop asking questions. And that, more than anything, disturbed him. Combs' voice softened. "They fed on applause for years, on cameras, on people who didn't know what they were giving. But the light started to dim. So they needed something stronger." Ellison shook his head slowly. "These are delusions." Combs looked up, his eyes glossy but sharp. "Then why are they multiplying?" That stopped Ellison. He stood abruptly, chair legs squealing against the tile. "This is done." Combs didn't react, just leaned back, eyelids fluttering closed, like he'd been waiting to be dismissed. Ellison walked out into the corridor and didn't stop until he reached his office. He closed the door, sat down, and stared at the visitor log until the letters blurred. He knew the protocol, knew the right chain of command, the names to call, the reports to file. Instead, he called for a quiet transfer. Combs's cell was to be sealed off. No staff access without written clearance. All medical interventions suspended unless under direct order. The order was filed within the hour. That night, Ellison stayed late, pacing his office with the lights low. He found himself staring at old newspaper clippings from the early 2000s, not about Combs, not directly, about parties that turned violent, lawsuits that disappeared, victims who retracted, celebrities who vanished for a year then re-emerged with new faces, new accents, new eyes. He didn't believe it, not the demons, not the feeding, but he believed something had happened, something that had been whispered about behind velvet ropes and gated estates, something that prison walls couldn't contain. Maybe Combs had cracked, maybe guilt had eaten through his mind. But then he remembered the medical report again. 11 inmates, same phrase. He's feeding them through us. Around 3 a.m., Ellison's intercom crackled, just a low buzz, no voice. He picked up the receiver, heard static, and then he swore it, just for a second, a laugh. Not an adult's. Light, playful, echoing from somewhere it didn't belong. He hung up the phone and ordered the audio logs purged. Chapter 8. The tray came back full. It had been 18 days since anyone had seen Sean Combs. At least, seen him properly, moving, breathing, walking under his own will. There were whispers that he'd been wheeled out of Tier 8 in the dead of night, face covered, cuffed to a stretcher, head turned toward the wall like he was trying to hide from the hallway lights. Others said he never left at all, just stopped casting a shadow when you walked past his cell. Officially, he was listed as under medical observation. Unofficially, he had vanished. Down in the kitchen, Latrice didn't ask too many questions. She'd learned by now that curiosity was currency you couldn't afford in a place like MDC Brooklyn. But something about that morning's delivery schedule made her pause. There it was, sitting in the corner by the dry storage lockers. A single tray, no paperwork, no heat tag. Just sitting there like someone had dropped it from the sky. She stared at it for a long while before touching it. The plastic felt warm but not fresh. The metal lid had no fingerprints. When she cracked it open, her stomach turned. Not from the smell, but the lack of it. There was food on the tray, sure, but it didn't smell like anything. Not grease, not seasoning, not even the staleness of prison meat. Just blank. Chicken patty, 2 slices of white bread, a scoop of mashed potatoes, a half pint of milk. It was exactly what they used to send to Combs. But the label on the side had no name, no date, no cell designation, just the tray. Sitting there. And the fork? It was clean. No smudges, no scratches, polished like it had been shined by hand, like it had never been touched, not once. But Latrice could swear she'd seen that very tray leave the kitchen 2 days ago. The dent on the left corner looked familiar. So did the melted edge where the heating unit had burned it weeks back. It had gone out. She was sure of it. But now it was back. And it was full. By midday, the gossip reached the kitchen from upstairs. One of the new guards was running his mouth too much, talking about how Tier 8 was practically a ghost floor now. Half the inmates were transferred out without explanation. The other half had gone silent, wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, wouldn't even leave their bunks during rec, just stared at the walls like they were waiting for a knock that hadn't come yet. Latrice kept her head down and kept her hands moving. Dishes, trays, wiping stainless steel that never looked clean. But she couldn't stop glancing back at that tray in the corner. They told her to toss it, but she did. She hid it in the bottom of the dry bin and covered it with unused cutlery. Something about it, it felt wrong to throw it away, like discarding it might be an invitation, an insult, a breach of some quiet, terrible agreement. That afternoon, while mopping the freezer hall, she caught a sound on the intercom. It crackled to life for half a second, just static, like usual, but then over the speakers something played. It was faint, barely a melody, but she knew that tune. She'd heard it humming from a cell block weeks ago, wrapped in reverse syllables and wet coughing. It was one of his songs, but it wasn't right. The pitch was warped, the beat staggered, and in the background she thought she could hear a child's voice, not singing, sobbing. The line clicked off mid-verse, and the hallway went silent again. Later, while organizing the spice racks, though most spices in MDC were just labeled Seasoning A or Meat Dust, she saw something strange in the condensation on the prep window. A symbol had been drawn there, perfectly centered in the steam, a circle with a triangle pointing downward. Inside, a single eye. She wiped it away fast, but her hand trembled the rest of the shift. When she clocked out, the tray was still there. That night, she dreamed. Not like normal dreams, not even like nightmares. She was in the dish room, alone. The overhead lights flickered in a rhythm, syncing with the clink of unseen utensils. The room was silent except for the soft, metallic dragging sound of something wet being pulled across the floor. From the far end of the hall, she could see a long banquet table. Not a prison table. This one was elegant, black marble top, carved legs. It stretched too far past what the walls should allow. On it were trays, hundreds of them, each one full. But none had forks, just spoons. And next to each tray sat a person, silent, expressionless, their faces blurred like fogged glass. One by one, they turned toward her. And then came the whisper, "They're already inside." She woke up gasping. Her mouth was bone dry. Her hand hurt, cramped from gripping her bedsheet so tight it had ripped. The next day, she returned to the kitchen. No one spoke much. Maria kept her headphones in. Shonda didn't even show up. Miss L kept crossing herself every time she passed the storage door. The tray had been moved. Latrice hadn't touched it. But now it was sitting out in the open on the prep counter, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. She stared at it for a full minute before lifting the lid again. Still full, still untouched. Except this time, something had changed. Inside the half-pint milk carton was a folded scrap of paper. She pulled it out with shaking fingers and unfolded it slowly. Drawn in ballpoint pen was a small, precise sketch of a drain, circles spiraling inward, and in the center, a mouth. Beneath it, the words, "Feeding was never optional." Latrice almost dropped the tray right there, but she forced herself to hold it steady. Her breath caught. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt thicker, like she was breathing through a wet cloth. She turned the tray slowly. The underside was scratched. 3 words, carved in shaky but deliberate lines. "It's your turn." She backed away. Left early. Didn't sign out. That night she locked her door for the first time in years, closed the blinds, unplugged her microwave, sat on the floor with the lights off, and stared at the walls. Around 2:15 a.m., she felt it. Not a sound, not a shadow. A presence. Something watching from inside the walls, inside the pipes. She didn't sleep. She didn't blink. The next morning she returned to the kitchen, trembling, exhausted, numb. The tray was gone. No one had taken it. No one even remembered it being there. Latrice stood frozen for minutes. Then, against her better judgment, she walked over to the dry bin, lifted the lid. The tray was there again, but this time it was empty. Every crumb gone. And the fork? Still polished. Still clean. She reached down, her fingers brushing the edge of the tray. It was warm, and for a moment, just a breath, she swore she heard the sound of a child's laugh. But she was the only one in the room. and no one had opened the door.